Hello, I'm Russ Teasdale of Evolution Dental in Portland, Oregon. People ask me how I became interested in airway and apnea issues, so much so that we now limit our practices exclusively to that, to TMJ, and to non-extraction orthodontics. Well, it's a long story. Even as a middle schooler, I was aware of my mother's uneven breathing at night. Her snoring was loud and carried throughout the house, and my brother and I used to joke about it, trying to drown her out, snoring with fake snoring of our own. It was a fun and harmless childish reaction to something we did not understand. Later, whenever I would return to visit my parents or they would visit us, the snoring came with her. Except over the years, it would stop, and I would awaken at the extended pauses. "Come on, Mom," I'd whisper to myself, "breathe." And after a long time, there'd be a loud snort and a long, deep inhale, and I would relax. I was very conscious of the pauses, but I did not know enough to recognize it as obstructive sleep apnea. So I said and did nothing. She passed away years later in her sleep and never being aware of her problem. And only 5 or 6 years later, I began to learn of OSA and put the pieces together. I learned because on a whim, I took a home sleep test. People had told me that on occasions I would snore loudly, and I just wanted to prove that my problem was not an obstructed airway. It proved exactly the opposite. My apnea was rated in the high, moderate, low, severe range, a great shock to me. I would stop inhaling for over a minute at a time. During the day, I would become suddenly very tired. I would sleep whenever and wherever possible. I was far worse off than I had ever suspected. I was, in fact, my mother's child. And I could not ignore it. It was threatening my life. And so began my education into dental airway growth and development. Suddenly, crowns and bridges, implants and root canals all assumed a secondary importance. I mean, the greatest smile in the world means very little if you've suffered from a severe stroke or worse. And because it became a priority in my own life, I could no longer ignore it in my patients. And so, concurrent with my own treatment, I elected to leave the hallmark arenas of dentistry and to dedicate myself to treating what is perhaps the most preventable cause of heart attacks and strokes, of obesity and diabetes, and of such diverse factors as ADHD, bedwetting, and TMJ. Because, as we all know, everything in the body is interconnected and closely intertwined. Causes and responses ripple in endless waves throughout our body, creating compensations and corrections by the nanosecond. But they eventually all trace back to the need to breathe, and that involves an open and free airway, and that in turn is largely determined by the size and positions of the jaws and the teeth. And no one in the medical field knows more about teeth and jaws than does the dentist. I continue in my own treatment, and I've seen my apnea levels drop into the middle of the mild category. I no longer snore. I breathe through my nose. I continue to expand my palate. I'm about 80% of the way to my goal, and I feel like I have more energy than I did 10 years ago. This is my testimonial to how it's affected my own life and the lives of those around me. So that's why we set up Evolution Dental, because it enables us to do the greatest good for the greatest number, because I hear of the positive effects that it has on others, and because I know the life-changing effects it's had on me, and because I wish to high heavens that someone would have, tied all this together years ago when I was in elementary school. Thank you. I'm Russ Teasdale of Evolution Dental, and I invite you to contact us if you have any questions or concerns. Breathe easy, live long, and thrive.